Okay, everybody, welcome to our FDD session. It's really great to see everybody here. Could you go back to the previous slide, please, Sherry? Appreciate that. And guys, if you can, we definitely want to hear from you. If you've got questions, obviously raise your hand, or you can kind of blurt those out, or you can put those in the chat. But if you're not talking, if you could go ahead and mute your microphones, I'm getting some kind of feedback. So, okay, very good.
And Chris, we have Billy Lavelle responsible for the lovely Dionne Warwick music selection this morning.
I was going to ask. Yes, it is.
So thank you, Billy. That was awesome.
Yeah, man. That was nice. It was a good, smooth way to ease into a Friday afternoon. I like it. Well, good stuff, guys. We will talk. We're going to talk here about kind of resetting a little bit, big picture, right? Kind of to use an aviation example, add power, come to 30,000 feet and see where we are right on the horizon here. We're going to look at our leaderboard. We are going to cover in good depth here the FDD. We are blessed to have Michael Rosenthal, who is a phenomenal, experienced franchise lawyer who was very, very kind to join us on his time off here. And he'll be joining us, I think, from the road. But Michael is with us, and we really appreciate that. He'll tell us what to look for in an FDD. Again, this is the primary thing that you're going to be using for your due diligence, really the factual stuff. Our favorite part of the due diligence is the validation. We're going to cover that as well. And that's where we get to talk with other business owners in the system who have opened the same business that we are considering opening. There's no better person to ask, what do you like? What don't you like? Where do you get the support? What could be different? What could be better? And for us to evaluate that all through our own filter, right? And so this is really, we're in the meat of the due diligence. Finally, at the end and throughout, we will certainly take questions, and then as always, we'll have the breakout session individually with your two coaches. So with that, we'll kick off here. Next slide, please. So this is where we've been, guys. Where we've been and where we are and where we're going. All this initial stuff up front, steps 1 through 4, since we started here on Valentine's Day with our information session. This first 5 to 6 weeks has been spent doing a lot of self-reflection, understanding who we are and how we match up with what is going to make for a good franchisor for a particular system. Steps 5 through 8 is where we are now, right? And we're sort of the latter stages of that. That's where we've made these introductions to outside parties. Most of you at this point have had franchisor discussions, have had some sort of a funding call, and most of you should be nearing the end of the due diligence, the latter part of the due diligence, which is that FDD review and validation. So steps 5 through 8 is all about introductions to outside parties and really digging deeply on the due diligence, making sure that it's a good fit. And vice versa, the franchisor is evaluating you to make sure that you're a good fit for their franchise. And then finally, really these 10 steps, we break up into those 3 sections. Those last 2 sections are really, it's decision time, right? The self-reflection's done, the due diligence is nearly complete, and it's time to decide. It's time for both parties that have been dating, decide if they want to get married. And you will be invited to, if they like you and they think you're a good fit for their system, they will invite you to that discovery day or confirmation day or meet the team day. It's the day that has more names than anything. And if you go to that day, they will then make a decision on whether or not they're going to offer you that franchise. And then typically you've got a week or so to make that decision. So that's decision and act time at steps 9 and 10. So this is really that final stage, these final 2 stages of due diligence. So really looking forward to getting through this stuff. Okay, next slide. This is our current leaderboard. We've got several that are here in step 7 and 8, which is right where you should be. And it looks like we've got 5 that are there in step 5, really in the midst of those franchisor calls. You guys will have step 6, which is funding next, but very, very shortly thereafter, you'll be going through FDD and validation. And in fact, the precise timing of that, if you've already spoken to a franchisor, some of those franchisors will give you that FDD a little bit sooner than others. So some of you, it could well be that you've already received that. So this will be very appropriate for you to hear. Okay, next slide, please. So before I turn it over to Michael, or is Michael covering this one, Edgar? He's got it. Okay. Everyone, Michael Rosenthal, franchise attorney extraordinaire. Michael, take it away.
Okay, great. So first of all, I'll apologize for the background noise. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I am driving down to Florida with my wife for a college reunion and stopped at Chick-fil-A for some Wi-Fi. So I guess it's a starting point to talk about the FDD. I would say the first thing I tell people is make sure that you read it. I'm going to read it if you hire me to do that, but it's important and critical that you read it, that you make notes. So you're going to want to write down any questions that you have, review it with your coach, and if you want, review it with a franchise attorney. But it's really critical that you read it. I can't tell you how many times I've asked a client, so what did you find that was a question? The response I get is, well, I didn't read it. You need to read it. It's got a lot of good information in there. It's required by law, and it has a franchise agreement you're going to be signing if you buy the franchise. And it's critical that you make sure you don't have any questions about the contract and that you understand it, because you're going to be living with it for an extended period of time. Very important. In terms of what to look for, let's just talk about key elements. These are some things that I think are most critical, but again, you should read the whole thing. Start with item 2, which talks about the leaders within the organization. And that would be the officer's experience. You should look at what's the relevant industry experience. Have they worked at any brands that you know, such as startups or for startups, as opposed to brands that you know? So it gives you a little bit of better sense of what's their background. The fact that they've worked in franchising is helpful, but you want to know in what capacity and for what types of companies that they worked. Are they relevant to what you're looking to buy? Item 3 deals with litigation history. So I always get this question, which is, at what point, if there's a lawsuit or a number of lawsuits, should I be concerned if I'm looking to buy a franchise? The answer, of course, is it depends on how big the system is. If it's a fairly substantial system, it's not unusual for them to have some litigation. And just want to take a look at it, make sure you understand what the litigation was about, when did it occur, and is it too much for the size of the system that you're dealing with. So if it's a system like Dunkin' Brands, for example, it wouldn't be shocking if they had 15 cases listed, because they have, I don't even know the number anymore, 6,000 or 7,000 units in the United States. That's really not a lot of litigation for the size of the system. But if you have a system with 50 units and they have 3 cases, it could be a red flag. You want to dig deeper on it. Item 6 deals with fees and payments. So questions you're going to be asking yourselves are the fees reasonable? Are they transparent? Do you understand them? And do you understand how you're going to be paying for things? If you don't, you want to ask questions and try to get it nailed down. And then the big thing that I always look for are anything that I think is a penalty. Many franchisors have some kind of termination fee. Sometimes it's liquidated damages, they call it. There's a formula for it, or a fixed amount. And that's not necessarily bad, but you just want to know, what is it? And what am I going to owe if I decide I change my mind and I want to exit the system at some point? I'm not happy, or I'm not making money. So you're going to take a close look at that. Make sure you really understand what the cost is. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with clients who bought something, and then 2 or 3 years later they want to exit for some reason, and they come to me and they have no idea how much money they're going to owe the franchisor. That's something you should have a fairly good sense of going in. Item 7, initial costs. This just helps you understand what the startup costs will be. It's supposed to reflect costs which are through and including 90 days after you open your franchise location in the business. It doesn't mean that at the end of the 90 days you're going to be profitable. You might be, you might not be, but that's what this outlines. I would say the big thing is you want to verify the accuracy of these costs with some current franchisees. If you're doing due diligence, ask them, were the numbers that were in item 7 really reflective of the actual costs that they incurred? Item 11 deals with operations and training. So you're going to be looking at description of their operations, marketing, training support. What kind of training are you going to get? What kind of support are you going to get? Understand that most franchise agreements simply say, after the initial training, we're going to provide you with whatever support we think you need. So it's in their discretion. This is a good thing to ask existing franchisees about. Was the training adequate? Was the training great? And then what actual support have they gotten from the franchisor? What support have they asked for? That's a good one to dive into. Item 12 deals with territory rights. So you want to find out, is your territory exclusive? Can other people come into your territory and offer services that are competing franchisees? And is the territory static, or does it change upon renewal? Because most franchise agreements have renewal terms. You're going to want to know, can they reduce your territory upon renewal? Sometimes we'll see that in areas where population is growing quickly. So a place like Florida, for example, Texas, and you just want to be aware of that. It's not necessarily bad. It's something that you need to just know going in. Okay, item 19. This is a big one. So this is financial performance representations. In plain English, I sometimes call this earnings claims. It's not always earnings claims, but it's data about the the franchisees in the system and what kind of revenues they may have. Sometimes there may be metrics or discussion about expenses on a per unit basis, or the types of expenses you can expect to incur in operating your business. Franchisors are not required to have any information here. It's elective on their part, but I think it's important, if they don't provide you with information, to ask, particularly if it's a somewhat established system. If they have good information, my assumption is they would give it to you. So if they're been around for a while, they're not giving you item 19 information. Again, that's it's a warning sign. It doesn't mean that they don't have great system revenues, but you're going to really want to dig into that deeply when you're talking to other two franchisees that are in the system already. Item 20 deals with franchise unit data. So this just reviews the number of franchise units that are out there and openings and closings. It's a 3-year, it's really 3 snapshots over the last 3 years of the system. The big thing here, I would say, is it tells you how many units are there, how quickly has the system grown in the last 3 years, and then whether unit failures, which are usually shown as either terminations or ceased operations, other reasons, are a big issue. Most systems have some turnover. The question is it significant, and are you concerned about it? And then kind of coming in for a landing here, items 21 and 22 deal with financial statements. You're looking at the franchisor's financial health. I always say, and then lastly, copies of the contract. So the FDD is required to attach a copy of any agreement or agreements that you are expected to sign or might likely sign as a franchisee. So that's going to include a franchise agreement, a lot of side agreements, typically dealing with things like covenants not to compete, guarantees, agreements that you're going to turn over the phone number if you leave the system, those kinds of things. Again, just to emphasize, you want to read and understand these. I think that those of us, I'll include myself and the Vetrepreneur team that I know, we're good people. So we assume that everybody else is a good person, but not everybody else is. And all of you are veterans or in the military currently, so you know the world has some people in it who aren't great people. That's why we need a military. So what I would say is don't rely on good faith alone. Read the contracts and understand them. And the last piece of that I emphasize is you may really, really trust the franchisor, and that's fine. Just understand that they have the right to sell their business to a third party. So you may not be dealing with that individual down the road who's the founder or whatever at that company. And that's why the contract's important. So a little bit more about what the FDD is, and a lot of times clients have a misunderstanding that the FDD is a contractual agreement. It is not. It's an information document that's required by the Federal Trade Commission before somebody sells you a franchise. It has attached to it the franchise agreement. That is the contract. So if something is going to be negotiated, it's the contract, that franchise agreement, not the FDD. The FDD is just frankly a template that they have to fill in with information that is required by law. So there's really nothing there to negotiate. And I guess the last piece of Sarah, did you have a question? The last piece I'll add about the franchise agreement. So 3 things that I'm always looking at. I already mentioned the liquidated damages, which is what happens if you terminate early for any reason. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean you're terminating because you weren't successful. I've had situations where people terminate because they had an illness in the family or they took ill and they just wanted to sell the business. Things like this happen in life. I had a guy terminate after several years at a money-making restaurant some years back. And I think the short version is he was in his 50s and he met, I'm assuming, a woman he found attractive in her 30s. She didn't want to live in Atlanta anymore. So he wanted out of the business. And so he was looking at what's the cost of terminating. In that case, I convinced him he should sell the business. But that's just something to be aware of. Many franchisors will ask for a spousal guarantee. So if you're married, they're going to ask your spouse to guarantee all the financial obligations, and also that your spouse will honor any covenants regarding confidential information and covenant not to compete in that industry. And what I always say to folks is, if your spouse is going to participate with you in the business, well, then he or she should sign that guarantee. That makes perfect sense. If they're not going to, then I generally suggest that you offer to have them sign a covenant not to compete, a covenant to protect that confidential franchisor information. Really push back on the financial guarantee, because as I often point out, if my wife, who's sitting across the table from me here at Chick-fil-A, didn't want to sign a financial guarantee, I can't make her. Man, what am I going to do? Put a gun to her head? So, I wouldn't. Say she wouldn't. But that's the quick fact point that I always give people, and it's something to be mindful of. Some franchisors just insist on it, and that's a family decision you need to make. And then the last critical thing in the franchise agreement, in my view, is how any disputes get resolved. Sometimes the franchise agreement is silent on it, and that means that you go to court. Sometimes, very frequently, They'll have provisions for mediation, which is a process for trying to resolve disputes by agreement using a trained neutral. And frequently, very frequently, a franchise agreement will call for arbitration, which is essentially a private form of litigation. There's typically a lawyer engaged by the parties to hear the evidence and resolve disputes without a judge or a jury. So you just want to know, well, how do disputes get resolved? And is there anything in the dispute resolution provisions that you might have a problem with down there? And that is something that I think it's helpful to have a lawyer to understand. Lastly, I guess to give you a sense of how I work, if you want someone to review the documents, we'd be happy to do that. Typically, we work on a flat fee basis, and I do give a discount to veterans, which is, I think, about 12 or 13%. And the flat fee covers our review, our written comments, and then up to an hour after we send you the comments for Q&A or anything else that you want. The idea is we want people to make sure they understand everything that's included in our fee. In terms of when you should engage a lawyer, I always say when you're done or nearly done with all of your due diligence. There's no point in hiring me or anyone else and paying a fee if you're not pretty confident that you are ready to go forward with this brand. So that means you've done everything else. You've met with the franchisor, you've talked to other franchisees, you've consulted with your coach, and you feel like, yeah, this is pretty much it. Then it's the time to get in touch with Mike and see if you want me to review the documents. I think that's it from my end, Chris.
Yeah, no, good stuff, Michael. If you could, Sherry, go back to slide 6. Really good insight, Michael. Does anybody have any questions, feel free to just come off of Mike and go ahead and ask Michael any questions that you guys might have. Go ahead. Whoever raised their hand there, BL, go ahead, fire away.
Yeah, this is Billy. Thanks, Michael, for the presentation. My first question is actually not for Michael, but is this presentation available later? Is there a way we can have access to the presentation? That's a question for probably Sarah or Sherry.
Yes, yeah. So the presentation will be available for everybody later next week.
Okay, thank you. So Michael, my question has to do with FDD. In my case, I'm dealing with purchase agreement. It's a business opportunity. It's not a franchise. So it's not as voluminous as the FDD. How do you deal with that, and what options do I have? And by the way, you mentioned fee, but I don't think. I don't think you mentioned what the fee was.
The fee is $1,695, and my normal fee is $1,895. So I provide a $200 discount.
And Michael, if I could just add, when I did my last document review, which was over 6 years ago, I spent over $2,000. So I would say that is a good value.
And I do appreciate the service that y'all have rendered to our country. So your business opportunity question, quite honestly, what I would suggest is forward the information that you have to me. Just, you can email it to me, and I can take a look at it, and we can just quote you a fee. It's going to be less than the FDD review because, as you've noted, it's a lot. Typically, it's a much, much smaller document. It varies by state, depending on what state you are in. So that can affect the length of it.
Okay. I'm in Florida.
Okay. So Florida has certain guidelines that the seller is supposed to adhere to in terms of information they provide. And we just take a look at it. I can quote you a fee for doing the review. It'll be significantly less than the $1,695. And then, honestly, most sellers of business opportunities, there's more information that they could give you, but they give you what's required by law. So there's nothing wrong with that. But we could probably come away from the review with an additional list of questions you might want to ask them, just to make sure you're getting all the information that you need to make a sound decision.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Good question, Billy. Thank you. Anybody else have a question for Michael?
Yes, I have. I got a quick question about litigation. Is I just kind of lost a train of thought. I had a couple of questions here, but if you know, when the FDD is renewed, if a franchisor then goes into litigation a month or two after that, you know, before they're renewed again, how does that need to be disclosed to me in any way, or how is it disclosed if they are in current litigation that's not disclosed on the FDD?
So the FDD has to be renewed annually, or when there's a material change in the information, whichever first occurs.
Okay.
So I think any franchise lawyer and every regulator in the country would say, if they've gotten involved in litigation since the time that they published that FDD, that's material, and it needs to be updated. So they can update it by supplementing it with just some additional information about the litigation, or by just publishing if the FDD is, let's call it version 2.0, it might be version 2.1, which includes the information about the litigation. If they fail to tell you about it, in my view, that would give you grounds to rescind or undo the contract later. If you didn't know about it, if you knew about it anyway, then it falls under what I call the no harm, no foul rule. But in theory, they should be updating that information right away. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And one thing on termination fees. What are, I know, I'm sure it varies, but what are common fees, or what's typical? You know, when do you raise a flag and start questioning?
Good question. So the most typical thing that I see is a formula, which is essentially a look back at the last 1 year's royalty multiplied times a factor which runs between 1.5 and 3. 2 used to be kind of industry standard. I'm seeing that kind of inch up towards 2.5 on average. But that's typically how they measure their damage. What you want to avoid is having something that says you're going to owe them royalties for the rest of the term if the term is 10 years or longer, because that can be a lot of money. And many franchise agreements have monthly minimum royalties of some type. Not alarming, that's fine. But if you're tied into paying X dollars a month and you want to get out in month 15 and there's 105 more months, you'd want to know about that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you,
Jerry. Those were really great questions. I'll just, one other thing to add: franchisors have to submit their FDDs annually, and it's within 120 days at the end of their fiscal year. So most of their fiscal years are on a calendar year, so it's very similar to taxes. So the FDD that you get will need to be, in most cases, submitted, refiled at by April 30th, and then you'll have that fresh information from the previous fiscal year, which is usually that calendar year. So just for your, so we're actually in the midst of refiling season right now, and when that happens and you're in the middle of the process, you need to be redisclosed on the new FDD. And there's also, in certain registration states, there's about, California, Maryland, Virginia are 3 of the common ones we work with. If you're in the middle of a process and those states require registration, which means the franchisor has to submit and the state has to then approve that, sometimes that can take time. So it can really slow things down. So anyway, just some additional information on that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. But great question. Any other questions for Michael? There we go. Billy, go ahead.
Yes, one more question. I know today we're talking about review, that's the pre part of the item, but once one start the business, if there's litigation, does your office also can make arrangement to handle things such as litigation or legal items?
Well, first of all, obviously, I hope you never need me for that. But yes, is the answer to your question. We do represent franchisees in disputes. I will tell you that and I think this is true for everybody at my firm that does franchise work. I'm a big believer in trying really hard to resolve disputes, franchise disputes, through mediation. It's a very effective tool. It solves a lot more problems frequently than litigation. But we do that, and certainly can handle the arbitration and the litigation. Depending upon the state that you're in, and most franchise agreements have what's called a forum selection clause that requires litigation be brought where the franchise owner is located. The exception is California doesn't allow that. So if you live in California, you get California litigation. Depending on the state, we may or may not have a lawyer in your state, and I might refer you elsewhere, or I might suggest that we associate a local lawyer in that state that I've worked with in the past. Again, I hope you never get to that point. The one thing I'll add is, if you're starting to have problems, the right time to call a lawyer is as soon as possible. Don't wait. I had some people call me this week, and I felt terrible. They told me they only had 2 weeks of operating capital left, and they wanted me to solve the problem for them. And that's like wheeling somebody into the ER who hasn't had a heartbeat for the last 5 minutes. It's really asking the ER doc, a lot of them, to get that heart going again. And I just told them, frankly, I didn't think I could help them, and I didn't see any reason to charge them to make their misery worse. Sooner is better than later.
Thank you, Billy. Sherry Connor asked a question. Michael, are you registered or licensed, I guess, in all 50 states?
I'm not, and I don't know any lawyer that is. I am licensed in Georgia under the American Bar Association ethics rules. I am supposed to practice in Georgia, and outside of Georgia, I can practice in other states if it's within an area that I have specialized knowledge and expertise in, which I do with franchise law. That's the vast majority of my practice. So I feel comfortable. I can't appear in a court in another state without a local lawyer present. My firm has offices in, I don't know how many states, 25 offices, I think about 13 or 14 states. But I have I'll use the old-fashioned term, Rolodex of franchise lawyers that I know in almost every state. So we can always reach out to them. I may not have any in the Dakotas or Wyoming, but most places I do.
But for purposes of franchise agreement and franchise disclosure document review,
Yes, no problem at all.
No matter what state you're in. Yep.
Correct.
Okay. Great. Any other questions, guys? Last question, Michael. You said you're a Chick-fil-A. Are you an original chicken sandwich guy or a spicy guy?
I like the original chicken sandwich. It's hard to, I mean, billions have been sold, right?
Yes. Do you do the full meal?
Typically, yes, because it's not enough. I'm a big eater.
Do you do the +1 on the sandwich?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, we're getting a survey of taste here. That's right. It is amazing. I'm in, a relatively small town. It is off an interstate in Georgia. There's a brand new large Chick-fil-A.
Yeah. Well, as you may know, Tammy DeCoo, one of the coaches on the call here, is a former Chick-fil-A franchise owner. So
I did not know that.
Yes.
The Chick-fil-A, the average unit volume that they do is, I don't know if this is true. My partner, who used to be a chicken franchisor general counsel, told me that their average unit volume is over $6 million a year now.
Big numbers.
Yeah.
Tammy could probably verify that, but she may have to do you bodily harm.
I don't need to be killed over secrets.
All right. Michael,
Thank you all.
so much. We are going to let you go, and we appreciate you joining us here this afternoon.
You're very welcome. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than welcome to call or email.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Yep. Okay, guys. Yeah, just one thing I just wanted to reiterate just to wrap up FDD, and we'll get to validation, and then we'll wrap up the whole thing here in about 20 minutes or 25. You've got 4 options for FDD review. 2 of those are mandatory, and the first 3 are free. So we did a lot of talking about number 4, which we do recommend. You don't have to do it, but we do recommend it. But the first 2 are mandatory. You've got to read it, and you've got to read it actively. I recommend printing it off. It's going to be a quarter of a ream of paper or more, but that's the best way that I like to actively read. You certainly don't have to, but it's important to make active notes on any questions that you've got and anything that you don't understand and any concerns that you have. From there is the other thing that's compulsory is you've got to review that with the franchisor. Nearly all of the franchisors that you are working with, that we work with, are going to default to a scheduled call with you. They're going to give you the FDD. They're going to ask you to read it, and then they're going to schedule a follow-up call so that you have an opportunity to ask them questions and clarifications. It's really important because you got to get to the intent of certain clauses. That's very, very important. And it really is important to understand all this stuff. Third option you have is optional. If after that, you are dissatisfied with, the explanations or the concerns or any, you just don't fully understand it, go ahead and talk with your coach about that. And then the fourth option is obviously to review that with a franchise attorney. Now, again, let me make a distinction between FDD and FA one more time. The FDD is a disclosure document or simply for review. This is the way that organization operates. In the appendix of that FDD, you will find the franchise agreement. Franchise agreement is the contract. The FDD you get fairly early in the process, typically the second or the third call that you have with a franchisor, sometimes the first, but usually the second or third, you'll get that FDD. They send it to you. You've got to sign for it. That doesn't mean you're signing the agreement or anything like that. It simply means that you're signing saying that you received it. And that's the FDD. We do not recommend a legal review at that stage. If you decide that near the conclusion of your due diligence that you're very, very serious about moving forward with it, then we advise that you have the franchise agreement review done, which is usually around step 9, late step 8, early step 9, and that's when Michael will also review that FDD with you. So there's the options, there's the timing. Any last minute questions on FDD before we move to validation? Sarah.
All I was going to say is, I have used an attorney both times I bought a franchise. I think it was a good investment in my franchise education. And I would say in particular, if you are looking at a younger franchise, I think it's even more important to have an attorney review and say what is typical boilerplate language and what may be unusual in there. So, read it yourself. But for me, there's never been a replacement for having an attorney who speaks fluent, franchising to give it a once over. It gives me peace of mind.
Yep. We all have a friend or a family member who's an attorney. If they're not a franchise attorney, you're going to get very, very limited value from that because they're just not going to be able to put that into perspective on what's common, what's boilerplate, how often do these things become an issue? Listen, all these things it's very similar to real estate, right? That seller's disclosure in a real estate transaction is very similar to what an FDD is. But then if you purchase that home, you're going to sign a purchase agreement, which franchise agreement, very similar. So, but it's important to, lay all those things out. These are all the possible things that could happen. And if those things happen, this is how we're going to handle it. That's what that franchise agreement lays out. But it's also important, like Michael said, most of the time this comes down to what we used to say in the Navy, which was the reasonable man theory or the reasonable woman theory. You know, what makes common sense, and let's just figure out a resolution to this disagreement or this conflict that we have. So anyway, that's that. Okay, let's move on. Validation, Sherry, if you could forward down to that would be great. So validation, you've heard it a million times and you'll hear it a million more. Our favorite step in the whole process. It's when you get an opportunity to talk with other franchise owners in the system and hear directly from them. There's two types. Group validation, which will be set up typically by the franchisor. Oftentimes those are going to be pre-scheduled, and there will be usually multiple franchisees on those calls. There will be a conversation from the franchisee that's providing the validation, and then there's a Q&A period that follows that. These are very, very common because, you know, like I said, this is one of those things where when you get into the system, you're going to be asked to perform validation as well. And, you know, it takes time. Most franchisees are very happy to do it, but it does take time. So, you know, they don't want to bombard people within the system who aren't really serious about doing the due diligence on the business. If they're just tire kickers and they're not really serious about getting into business, they're probably not going to want you to be bothering the franchisees with validation. But that's why this tends to be a little bit further down the line. There's also individual validation. We highly recommend this. This is an opportunity. All the franchisees in the system will be listed in that FDD. You can look them up. The contact information is in there. I recommend, you know, reaching out to, you know, at least a couple, and asking them questions. You can ask for people that are in your own state. I wouldn't recommend, just a little tip here. It's not always a good practice to contact franchisees for validation that are like right next to you or like in the same region. And the reason for that is they may be very interested in protecting their adjacent turf, adjacent territory that may be open. And if they know that there's somebody looking at that may prompt them to purchase that additional territory, and then that would be no longer available to you. So recommend talking with you know, other people in the system for sure. But two types, group and individual. Next slide. Some of the things to ask them, you know, what is your financial performance? Everybody wants to know this kind of information, right? How long did it take you to get to break even? How long did it take you to get to profitability? How profitable are you now? How fast did your financials grow? Did your revenue grow? The only person that can answer those questions about that particular franchisee is themselves, right? No earnings claims can be made. Your coach can't tell you financial performance if it's not listed in the item 19 of the FDD, nor can the franchisor. However, the franchisee can talk freely and openly about their financial performance. So it's a really ideal time to talk about that. What was their reality going into the franchise system, and what surprises may there have been based on their expectations? You know, what kind of challenges have they seen? And most importantly, how does that franchise system overcome the challenges? Listen, it's business. There are going to be challenges, and solving problems is what work is. And that's not the issue, right? The issue is, what is the process that franchise system uses to solve problems and overcome challenges? Those are some really key questions. Not do they have them, but how do they overcome them? And one of the, you know, franchisor support, right? What level of support is there? Does that stay consistent over time? Does it wane over time? How has that trended? You know, you want to ask questions around that. How good is the training? How effective is it? And then finally, my favorite question is, would you do it again? Now, when you get all this information, you also have to take it and run it through your filter. I said this earlier. it's important not to say, well, that person's reality is going to be my reality. It may be, but it may not be. And the truth is, because you're a different person than they are, right? So someone may have challenges, with, I don't know, marketing. Well, they may be in a bad market and they may be really bad at business development and you're not, or vice versa, right? Someone may say, oh, marketing, oh, that's easy. Well, they're in a great market and that's just their middle name is marketing and business development, and yours isn't, and you're not in a good market. So you can't say that you're going to be able to replicate their success. You need to take that answer. You need to run it through your own filter and process it accordingly. Okay. That's it. So any questions on validation, or Sarah or Tammy, anything to add on validation?
And I would say, you're absolutely right. Once you have the FDD, you may reach out to whomever you want. They may or may not talk to you if you're not on a list, that you are actively validating and doing your due diligence. But you can ask for specific things. To Chris's point, if you do want to talk to a nearby neighbor, I think it's worthwhile asking. Get a little context and maybe ask for that. But if you want to talk to a fellow veteran, if you're going to run this with a partner and you want to talk to a partnership, specifically ask for that. I think that's very helpful.
Cool. Tammy, anything to add?
No, Chris, thanks. Not at this time.
So I was wondering, is it probably sounds like it would be okay to ask to speak to maybe a top performer, or, somebody in the top to 10, and then also maybe somebody in the lower performance unit. So is that acceptable, or is that okay to request?
Absolutely. In fact, I did that personally. I'm like, can I talk to someone in the bottom third? Now, I didn't call them going, so my understanding is you're a poor performer.
Right.
I would say, so how do you do? And, I would try to gauge. And what I found in most cases is that they just weren't working it.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't spending as much time, or, they were like, hey, I'm kind of semi-passive, but I barely spend a few hours a week. Or, I wish I had more time to put toward it, whatever the case may be. But that was helpful for me because I was like, you know what? I am going to work it.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that will not be my situation, but that's a completely appropriate thing to ask, Jerry. I think it's a good data point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and Jerry, just to follow up on that a little bit, you're not going to you don't technically need to ask permission to contact any of them. I do think it's probably a good.
But you may not know. From reading the FDD, you won't know who's a good performer and who's not.
Yeah, yep. But you can certainly, I think it's a good courtesy to get into, to just, ask the franchisor, hey, I'd like to talk with, so-and-so or this person or a few top performers or whatever, and they can facilitate that. So,
Okay.
Yep. Okay, guys, if you could go ahead and please click on that QR code that you see there, and we will just do a quick survey here, a quick quiz to see how we're doing. So what's the minimum amount of time that you have that must pass between the time that you get the FDD before you can sign a franchise agreement? And the answer is, in fact, 14 days. Again, we are in refiling season, so just know that if your franchise refiles their new FDD for the year, you will have to, that 14-day timer starts all over again.
Chris, could I just make one quick comment? If any of you, if your significant other may sign the franchise agreement, they should be disclosed. So anyone who signs a franchise agreement needs to sign an FDD receipt. So at the end, if you're like, oh, you know what, I never thought my spouse or business partner was going to sign the agreement, but then they decide they want to, they need to be disclosed and then wait 14 days. So do it up front. And if they decide not to sign, then no harm, no foul.
Great point. Next slide, Sherry. Okay, in one or two words, what is the most critical step when reviewing the FDD?
hot mug of
Somebody
tea.
participate. There we
I'd say
go.
validation.
Yeah.
Go ahead and enter it, guys. Let's do what we got. So read it. Someone put read it. Yes.
Yeah.
That is probably the most critical step. Listen, I get it. It's a thick legal document and it's a cure for insomnia sometimes for certain parts of it. However, it will define the relationship that you're going to have with that franchise system. And it's you can't just outsource it to a lawyer and say, tell me what I need to know, or your coach. You need to read it. You need to understand it. It's probably one of the most important parts. It's not the most fun. Step 8's the most fun, but it is probably one of the most important parts of the process.
Get a highlighter, a cup of coffee, and a scone and sit down and read it.
Yes. Okay. Next slide. What does item 19 in the FDD cover? Anybody else? Yes, it covers financial performance representation. So there's 2 places you can get financial performance information. That's one of them. And the other one is, anybody verbally? Come on. Sarah, tell them.
I'm sorry, Chris. What you said? What
The other place, 2 places you can get financial performance
Oh, validation. Yeah.
Yes, during validation from the franchise owner. Yes, yes. Okay, next slide. What's one question you would ask a current franchisee during validation?
I like Chris's. Would you do it again?
You guys are not this is not a spectator sport, guys. Come on, break
Come
those
on,
phones out.
people. Come on,
Let's go.
Jerry.
Get after it.
Billy,
I
you've
would
made validation calls. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would ask the same thing. Would you do it again? That's very important. And I would enter my response here, but I'm on a no. Yeah, show me the money. I have a new computer here that I'm not able to, I don't know, it's not working right. So that's why I'm not typing in.
I would ask them about performance, but mostly challenges. What kind of challenges they're going through?
Yep.
Right. And I agree. And we talked about this morning. A question I always like is, what would you do differently? You know, if you had to go in the Wayback Machine and do it again. People used to ask me that all the time. And the thing that I always told people is, you know, the franchisor gave me a grand opening and marketing range, and I spent the minimum. And if I had to have done it over again, I would have spent more. I would have been less penny wise, pound foolish. And because it did work. So people were like, oh, okay, that's helpful, you know.
Yep. Good stuff. And break even time frame, a good one. Again, it's gonna range, right? So you may ask one franchisee and they've got, you know, fantastic performance, and another one may not. One might be super happy, the other one may not be super happy. So again, don't take any of those things at face value. You have to ask follow-on questions to be able to run it through your filter. Would that challenge apply to me? And if so, how significantly? Or would that success translate and transfer to me? And if so, how successfully? That's the part that is really important. A lot of people forget that. They just assume that, oh, that person was great, so therefore I'm going to be great at that. Well, you need to understand you're not the same person, so you got to reconcile that. Okay, next slide. That is it. Last minute Q&A here as a group, and then we are going to move to the individual coach breakout sessions. Any last minute questions for the whole group? Okay. This was a really, really good session today. I appreciate everybody's attention. And with that, Sherry, why don't you go ahead and give them the breakout rooms, and you guys have a wonderful Friday. and best of luck in the latter part of due diligence here.